Okay, so welcome back to the second hour of Tuesday at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. These literary seminars are presented every day of the season except on Mondays. We are not here on Mondays, but we are here Tuesday through Sundays, and the 9 o'clock hour is reserved for talking about the shows that were on the outdoor stage. The 10 o'clock hour is reserved for talking about the plays that are presented on the indoor Randall stage. These seminars are funded in part by the generosity of Tina and Larry Howard and Utah Humanities, and I want to thank them publicly for their belief that after you see live theater, you want to come and talk live to people in the seminar grove. So thank you to Tina and Larry Howard and Utah Humanities. Yes. Okay, as I announced last hour, but we may have a few new people here this hour. The costume seminar, usually on Tuesdays and Fridays at this festival, the costume seminar today at 11 has been canceled, but we will have an actors seminar here tomorrow at 11 a.m. There is no charge for that. I hope you can come and be with two of the actors from the company tomorrow at 11 a.m. following our seminars. Now, this morning, I always like to ask if there's anyone here for the very first time to the Utah Shakespeare Festival, hence to the literary seminars. Any newcomers today? No? Okay. Well, then some of you might know this gentleman sitting next to me, J.R. Sullivan. J.R. Sullivan was Associate Artistic Director here at the festival from 2002 to 2009. Then he jumped the Cedar City ship and went to New York City to be Artistic Director of the Pearl Theater in New York. He's now back in his hometown of Chicago and is based out of Chicago, but has been a very busy man since leaving us, including being the co-author of two plays that you have seen here, Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, the adaptations of those Jane Austen novels. And I want to ask JR in a moment to tell us where they're going. I know of one production that's happening very soon of Sense and Sensibility, but JR has directed here numerous times on both stages, and has directed, I don't know how many of the canon on the outdoor stage, but his productions always have an intelligence, in my opinion, an intelligence to the characterizations that you see in those Shakespeare plays, as well as the plays on the Randall stage. This year, he is here directing a play that has not been presented at Utah before, Utah Shakespeare Festival, Peter Schaffer's Amadeus. And JR told me the other day that he has previously directed the Schaffer play 30 years ago at your theater that you ran in the Chicago area. But welcome, J.R. Sullivan. When JR was with us the other day for the first seminar of Amadeus, I asked him, and I'd like to ask that same question again. At first glance, you think of this play as being, of course, Schaffer's almost completely fictionalized view of the relationship that Salieri had to Mozart. But I think there's a larger question there concerning the playwright's relationship with God, and how how he interprets a character who in the beginning says, I will do anything if you will make me famous. And then at the end, when he's not famous, anyway, what would you say Schaffer's, if there is one or two main things, the themes in Amadeus?
Yeah, well, I think...
is that on? Push up. Yeah.
Hello?
Here, try this.
Hello? Okay. Well, certainly the theme of, it's not a question of where is God, which he which he has written about before as well. It's a theme of his, Royal Hunt of the Sun, which was about the Spanish conquest of Peru and the Incas, and the violence that went through the Americas, or Equus, which I think a lot of people know. and this play, but it's a question not of the existence of God, but the nature of God and how we interpret God, and what about that silence? Of course, it's a philosophical question more than a religious one. But a theme of the play, the greater theme of the play, I think, is forgiveness and atonement. And that's an aspect of this work that has been newly sharpened because as of the late 90s, when Peter Schaffer rewrote the play for the last scene, he was always bothered by how it ended. Didn't feel he had that quite right. As far as the last confrontation between Salieri and Mozart, these two protagonists, and you know, it's one of the necessities of the theater that two such characters must go brow to brow at some point, like Schiller's Mary Stuart, for instance. There's no evidence that the Mary Queen of Scots ever was with Queen Elizabeth, but there's no play without that scene. And similarly, he rewrote this. So in that sense, the ending of the play is entirely new, and he wanted to sharpen the themes of atonement. And that fractured sensibility and sense of self had to be sorted through and to create this last confrontation. And that's the great gain in the script. It's different from the film, if you remember that. It's certainly different from the original version of the play that was such a hit in the late 70s, early 80s, in that Salieri himself assumed the role of this messenger, this mysterious messenger who goes to Mozart, asking for the requiem to be written, you know, and that it must be done quickly, and don't tell anybody, and using that as a device to push him off the ledge. That disappears from this play, although that's one of the historical truths. There was such a messenger that saw Mozart. He was this cadaverous-looking, tall, skeletal servant of a man named Walsegg, Count Walsegg, who fancied himself a composer and who wanted to steal Mozart's Requiem, commissioned it via this servant, and was going to pass it off as his own. So that actually occurred under mysterious circumstances. So.
When you directed this 30 years ago, you used a different script?
Yeah, that was the original, the first successful one, yeah.
Okay, comments from the audience?
Hi, I was just telling my wife, we just saw this a month ago at the Little Theater in Las Vegas, of all places. They did it, and they did the scene where the Requiem was given to him to write. And I was sitting there through the whole play waiting for this to happen. And I said, something's left out here, but that was a different version.
I'm surprised that was licensed to them.
Yeah, I know. That's why I mentioned it.
Maybe it wasn't. Causing trouble here, right?
None of them are, they're not paid anyway, so.
Well, but you have to get permission to license it.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, you brought it up.
How much of the play is historically accurate? Like the relationship between Salieri and Mozart?
They knew each other. Salieri was in a position to help Mozart's career. That didn't happen. We don't know why, but he was in that position to do it. Mozart did die at 35 under mysterious circumstances. It could have been kidney failure. It could have been cirrhosis of the liver. It could have been rheumatic fever. It probably wasn't syphilis, although that's speculated. This Requiem was commissioned by a mysterious messenger. Salieri did cut his throat in 1823. He did live 2 more years. He lived out his life in the city infirmary in Vienna. And throughout all that time, he claimed that he had murdered Mozart. and that when the Venticello come out at the end with the Beethoven's conversation book, things are written out for Beethoven to read because he was deaf. That's all verbatim. That's all historical record. So all of that is true. But the key thing, and of course the legend, of course the rumor that Salieri poisoned Mozart has never quite died. Pushkin wrote a dramatic poem about it. Rimsky-Korsakov turned that poem into an opera. And this just sort of has lived on. So Salieri wasn't a bad composer at all. You can get his recordings. There's not as many of them as available as Mozart's, and they're nowhere near Mozart. But one has to wonder if he were able to be a ghost himself in the audience, what he would make of this play about him. But really, it's not about Salieri. It's about us. It's about us. It's not a historical record. It's about our relationship to self. Those of us who are neither cursed or blessed with genius, as Mozart was, but are really in the great wide swath of the average. I won't say mediocre, that might be too tough, but let's just say average, and what happens to the dreams of youth when we all dream of greatness? Who doesn't? And that series of compromises that we make through time to get by, and what happens to all of that. I think that's what it's about. Yeah. If we are not the central character in any play, that play doesn't have traction. Whether it's Shakespeare or Schaffer.
Yeah, picking up on what you just said, we all bring our life experience to the theater with us. Our oldest son has severe bipolar disorder. When he was first diagnosed, the psychiatrist said, "You're in good company." A lot of historians think that Mozart may have had that same condition.
Certainly demonstrates a lot of that. Yeah.
And as in the last part of the scenes, as they start to degenerate, I was thinking of our son. It's a blessing and a curse. Our son now has a PhD. He's a research scientist at Harvard Medical School. He's as close to genius as you can get without being Mozart. But it's his mental condition that allows him to do that gives him that creative edge. And so I wonder if Mozart's borderline insanity, if you will, allowed him to be Mozart.
We speculate on these things. We can't know. We have no record of these things. And we can't find his body, because the other true thing is that he was buried in a pauper's grave with 20 to 30 other corpses somewhere in outside of Vienna. So we can't find the DNA. But yes, that's, again, a strong connection to mind, heart, and soul for us when we watch these plays.
Well, I'm going to make a confession. We haven't seen the play yet. And in all the years we've been going to the theater, there's only one play that we walked out of, and that was Amadeus a long time ago. So initially I didn't buy tickets. And Jeffrey said, "Oh no, honey, they're going to take care of us. It's okay. You're at the Shakespeare Festival." So I had to buy tickets, and we're going. The reason we left was that our children were with us, and it was very, very, I'd say ribald, but it was more than that. It was over the top. How
Was this a Broadway production that you saw with Ian McKellen, or where did you saw it at a regional theater?
Yeah, we saw it at a regional theater.
Okay.
Anyway.
Well, and those of you that know this. I mean, Mozart is presented unflinchingly and unblinkingly in full vocal form with the scatological humor. That was actually also historically accurate. A lot of people have been, so that the language in the play is at times shocking. Was for you, and if you were with your children, it had to be all the more so. It's not, I I think 30 years later, I think we're certainly hardened to this overall because of its prevalence in media. But a difference here is that its use is not in any sense gratuitous, and it's certainly accurate. I think many people are surprised by it, and they think of it as very contemporary, and yet much of it is verbatim from his letters. He was from Salzburg. Apparently, Salzburgers are rather fond of scatological humor. That's what the research told us. That was news to me. And all the nicknames and woofy poofy things that he does in the play is all in the letters. And it's critical for the play because the rapture and divine nature of the Mozart sound is put against this character's behavior, and that's the chasm of paradox and conflict for Salieri, as he says after he hears that the remarkable serenade for the 13 wind instruments, the Adagio, in that first library scene. And he says, I heard the voice of God, and it emanated from a voice that I'd also heard, an obscene child. So the play says exactly what we experience about him, and it's that contradiction that's critical to the beginning. In the first act, Salieri believes that Mozart is his enemy. In the second act, it turns into his fight with God with Mozart as the battleground. And Mozart's harrowing diminishment and destitution, which is physical, economic, physical, mental, has a great impact on all of this in him. In fact, he was, as we know from history, this child prodigy who was carted all around Europe at the age of 5, playing for the Pope, playing for the kings, all across the continent, had, shall we say, an unusual childhood. And at the end of the play, when he regresses back into that childhood, that was the last time he was happy, as he says. All of that potty mouth stuff, comes from, that mentality, which deepens and furthers the perplexing, miraculous nature of this talent. So in our times, I see him, as a rock star in a sense. He certainly dresses like one and has wigs like one, in this play. And that's one of Schaffer's great ideas too, great creations, although that too is based on some evidence because Mozart was, shall we say, never good with money. And at the beginning of his career, when he's summoned to Vienna and given a commission by the emperor, right off the bat, at the age of 26, one could understand why he had a certain feeling that the future was going to be golden and everything was going to be fine, until he ran into the deeper perversity, which is the wickedness of human nature. And his crudeness and vulgarity is nothing against the evil that's done to him by another human being. So in any match of vulgarities, I think that's the question that we're confronted with, and what human beings are capable of doing to one another out of selfish self-interest.
So, JR, do you want to tell the Margaret Thatcher story?
Peter Hall. Peter Hall wrote that, was the original director who really, whose conception of this has really shaped all future productions of it. Primarily the idea that Salieri is performing his life, for us. That's how it's set up at the beginning. So the whole set is set up like a Baroque theater and painted as such. That's all painting, by the way. That none of that is dimensional. It's extraordinary painting by the crew here, like a Baroque theater at the time. And Peter Hall at the Margaret Thatcher, we all know who she was, yes. Conservative prime minister. She only came to the National Theatre in London once during her entire time at 10 Downing Street, and that was to see Amadeus. And she came backstage after the show very upset about the language that came out of Mozart's mouth. And she said Mozart would not have said those things. And having a Salieri, I think, reaction to it, like the creator of this music could not possibly be that person. And Peter Hall related what I have just related. Well, in fact, we have volumes of his letters that have survived him, and it's all there in black and white. Peter Schaffer is quoting many things verbatim. And he sent the books to 10 Downing Street, and a message came back to the National Theatre and Peter Hall from Thatcher saying, the Prime Minister has received the books and reiterates that Mozart could not have been that way. So you're going to believe what you're going to believe, I think.
Thank you. Well, I was fortunate enough 35 years ago to see Ian McKellen and Jane Seymour and Tim Curry, yes, on Broadway. And I must say that while everyone will talk about Ivers and due to him, and credit to him, your Mozart was amazing. He had a tight, in my opinion, Curry, who is a master of big things, couldn't match your Mozart's tightness. You could see, we were lucky to be in the front of the theater, but you could see his insanity from the beginning of that. Yes, you could. He was incredible. And one other actor that really stood out, one of your little wins, the darker skinned man, I could listen to him read the phone book to me. I really could.
Anthony Simone.
Oh, he was amazing. He could read my phone book any day to me. Two things that did disturb.
He may be available. If
He was amazing. Two things that were a distraction. That cape, you know, he couldn't fasten it. He carried that off brilliantly. He did. He always would. And then he about fell over on the table, on the desk, and it became a distraction because we watched him manage the cape rather than listen.
Yeah, I agree with you. You see it yesterday or last week?
Yesterday.
Yeah. This is what previews are for. You know, I mean, this is they call those these rehearsals with audiences to encounter these things, and that's one of the. It's all problem solving at a certain point, for a director, after rehearsing, teching, working out the rhythm of light and sound especially, and light especially in this play, because everything too is an emanation from Salieri's expressionism, his mind. But then there are these ABC things like the length of a cape and a clasp that won't work, and the actor being distracted by that, things like that have to be worked out. And I expect the new clasp is going to do that because if it sits on his shoulders correctly, it's easy for him to sweep it aside and step up onto the table. But that's it. See, one tiny little thing like that has a domino effect, and that's the glory of, and that's the nightmare of theater. Yeah.
And the other distraction was, and I don't know if it bothered anyone else, the shawl or the wrap that Mozart wore at the end. It was gray, and it could really benefit from charcoal or something. So I wanted to go and borrow it. It looked so soft and beautiful. It looked like cashmere. It looked just luscious. And I thought, well, this guy's impoverished. Nobody's taking care of him.
He probably needs it more than you, yes?
Yeah, he does. But it needs, I think it bothered me because it looked too fine to be at the end of his life. It was perfect for the first act, but for the second, I don't know. Anyway, thank you. Fabulous production. Amazing.
You. Thanks.
Maybe a wealthy person gave him that shawl.
They had many fine things in their house initially because they were overspending, and we're at a minimal set, of course, so there can't be a full realization like that, like Milos Forman could do, in the film. But aspects of that were meant to indicate, holdovers from a more extravagant, time. So.
Couple of just really minor nits. The Kyrie at the end Mozart seemed to end abruptly.
Yeah,
Was
that
that
was
deliberate or was that the
a
fade?
decision. Well, because that Amen goes for a long time, brilliantly in the music, but also we weren't wanting to represent the music exactly as written sometimes, with more abstraction as heard in this case by Constanza, and the Amen cutoff was meant to suggest the cutoff of Mozart's life before he actually finished the Requiem, because there are whole sections of that Requiem that were done by an amanuensis.
And you can feel that change if you perform when you perform that music,
Yeah.
where that happens.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like that Kyrie, the little section, started about 2 measures early before the Kyrie.
Well, you know your music, don't you?
And then it was an abrupt stop
Yeah, that was a choice.
of just the Kyrie, just a choice. Okay. And I wondered if the cape of Salieri seemed to be charcoal and not black.
A choice
that
by the
choice?
designer. Yeah,
Okay.
he felt that would give it a different shimmer and a more interesting cold look, and the coldness to match his hardened heart.
And Ivor's hands, as an old man, his
Yeah.
hands, he captured it.
The art of acting. Yes. Yeah.
Behind you.
First of all, of course, David Ivers was astounding. To be able to be able physically in front of your eyes, be an old, deteriorating man with a face that looked old, and without change of makeup or prosthesis or anything, become the young man. I mean, it was astounding. The one thing I would like him to focus on, we were sitting fairly close to the front, and I do wear hearing aids, so I don't have perfect hearing, but that he project the words he's thinking a bit more.
Another thing that we're discovering now in these previews, because when it moves from a small room over there on campus to that theater, and then when the theater fills up with people, the science of acoustics, shifts. So that's when you come again, I'm sure that'll be all in order.
I was wondering if you could talk for a minute about working with actors who seem to be very comedic, but pull off the drama really well. I found myself several times in this production with David and with your Mozart laughing and then immediately tearing up. Will you talk about, as a director, what those actors bring for you? And how that comes into play with how you direct them?
Well, I really, whenever I have my choice, I really prefer to work with actors that are good with comedy because of their innate sense of rhythm and timing. Not even if there's no comedy in the play, although all plays do. There's funny stuff in King Lear. And there's lots of funny stuff in this, which is to say that it is human and recognizable. It's funny for us in an audience. It's funny when we see something that's the truth. That's a premise of the human experience, going back to watching children play, and they do something that is truthful to what it is to be a person, and we're delighted. We laugh. Comedy is based on truth, as is great drama. A play like this rhythmically has to have a dynamism and a momentum that if you've got the music in your bones of listening and responding, which is what comedy in the theater is about, not making faces, not doing stupid things, but being in the rhythm of language and connection and a true interaction that builds comedy between people, and we recognize because it's the truth. That's the kind of actor I love to work with, and that's the kind of actor that can work so well in this play. And we're blessed to have that with this company, because people like David Ivers, who is known over the years primarily for his comic roles here, but is clearly a profoundly good dramatic actor. It's really all the same thing. It's just a matter of how it's proportioned throughout the story. Ultimately, we're always after the truth. It's got to be the truth. And that, as a consequence, that's the actor I prefer to work with. You know, they really get working you into that rhythm quickly because of the comic instinct. Their sense of your breathing with them, sometimes heard as laughter, sometimes just the attention, is so pronounced that it makes them so good in things like this.
Comment over. Oh, go ahead, sir.
When I arrived at the theater yesterday, I didn't realize that you were the director of Amadeus. But as soon as I saw your name attached to the cast list there, I was reassured, because your storytelling is always so clear cut, and the script always comes very clear. And thank you again for a very, very well told story that I got to disappear into. And that's the big thing about theater for me. It's an escape into some other people's lives for a while, which are much more interesting than my own life. So thank you again for a fascinating story.
So you find your own life in their life, and it's just in time to leave again, right? Well, thank you, Miles. I think clarity is our greatest job as directors. You know, we sure there's so much to do, but ultimately it's clarity for you. That's the most important thing.
Right. Jim, I was pleased to see that your the version of Sense and Sensibility that you co-wrote is going to be opening Sacramento Theater Company's season in the fall, and really looking forward to seeing it there. I saw it here when it had its premiere, and I'll be really intrigued to see how it's changed and grown since, I guess, 2 years ago now. And I was surprised to see that Michael Stevens is not directing it, and I was wondering if you knew why that wasn't the case. He did so well with your Pride and Prejudice at Sacramento Theater Company.
Yeah, it's interesting for Joe Hanratty and I, who have done these adaptations of Jane Austen's books. I think the Sacramento production is being directed by their current artistic director or executive director, Michael. Not Michael. I can't recall off the top of my head. But you know, we try to influence. These things are, if you saw them, in fact, there's a lot of how he handles Sense and Sensibility in Amadeus in terms of overlap of scenes and furniture whisking on and off and these kinds of things. And it takes a strong director and also an unsentimental one when it comes to the exigencies of the stage, you know, and time, so that rhythm, you know, can be maintained and doesn't stop cold because of a major set change that has to happen. So we try to influence these things as much as we can by suggesting directors that we know or ourselves to do them. But really, the value of our adaptations will only come out if they're director proof, you know, and still work, you know, with audiences, no matter what happens, you know, from that side. So we shall see, because Joe, you know, did the first Sense and Sensibility here. I did the first Pride and Prejudice at Milwaukee Rep. And then they move on. Pride and Prejudice is just opened at the American Players Theater in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Sense and Sensibility, to answer your earlier question about this, Nancy, Sacramento. It's also playing outside of Philadelphia next March. PCPA in California next summer. And the University of Connecticut Repertory Theater this fall. So productions are starting to come up, and then we'll get notices back and see, you know, how we're doing. But we count on them working, because really that's the only way it grows, you know, from the beginning.
I'll hog this for one more question. I've been really intrigued by Tasso Feldman's performance in The Seagull 3 or 4 seasons ago at Oregon Shakespeare. And
Tasso Feldman playing Mozart.
Mozart, yeah. And so I was very pleased that he had been cast as Mozart. And I was curious, did you have anything to do with that casting, or was he already cast?
David knew Tasso. Yeah, I had worked with Tasso at Oregon. I had seen him in a play up there when I was up there working a few years ago on As You Like It, and knew him. And but I'd sort of forgotten about him. And then Tasso did a video audition for me, put himself on tape with the vocal quartet speech that he does in Act 2 about the astonishing device of vocal quartet, when God, it seems, begins to speak directly through him about music. And that sold me. And of course, if you see illustrations, we have illustrations of Mozart, and it's astonishingly similar, in the eyes and in the mouth. So that's a bonus. But it's Tasso's mind and heart and soul that are creating this, and he has worked on it from the point of view of this man-child, and the paradox of the early life against the current life. He says in the play, Mozart says that when his father dies, who will show me the wickedness in the world? I could never see it. And of course he never can. And that's his tragedy, when this profound wickedness is done to him, in this play.
Thank you.
You will also see this afternoon in Charlie's Aunt, if you're going to that, and he was in David Ivor's production of Taming of the Shrew at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
I'm sitting here in shock and awe that no one has congratulated you and your entire team for the staging of this production, the costumes, the screen that opens up with the shadow in the back, the music that is played at appropriate times. Our group wanted to hear more music. If you could make it a little longer. It's a beautiful production.
Can you comment on what happened to Mozart's popularity? Especially as a child, he was so acclaimed. And then as an adult, when he was creating what we regard today as beautiful music, it was rejected.
Yeah. Shakespeare went into a fallow period too. Immediately after his life, he just sort of disappeared for a while, from theaters. It is a comment on the superficial nature of cultures. It is a comment on the nature of fame. It is a comment on us and our unwillingness sometimes to look deeper into things. I think that's especially a problem for us in contemporary times who live in these 24/7 news cycles, and anything and everything gets about 15 seconds before it moves on. That's the beauty of this, isn't it? The theater, where we can live with, an experience. So this is true. Mozart fell from favor. And Salieri was, and this is also true, the most famous musician in Europe, around 1785 and 86. Who knows why? But we, of course, have the advantage of hindsight, and our perception and brilliance, can see, of course, who was the better one. But what are we missing today would be a better question. And of course, in time, the true excellence was clear. But of course, Mozart had already been dead, some 20 years, and the world wags on.
I have it over here. I have a question. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I had the privilege yesterday of seeing your production of Amadeus and seeing Taming of the Shrew. Amadeus, of course, came to me as a story about Salieri, about the story being important, a little bit about Mozart, definitely Salieri, and more of David Ivers, which was great. I saw Taming of the Shrew, which was a total ensemble piece. There were no stars, there were no characters. Everybody was in the play together. There was no one to be picked out, and I know there are no small parts in theater. But how much of the direction is in the pages to make it about Salieri and David Ivers, and how much of it is not in the pages? What does the director add in his interpretation?
Well, it's certainly Salieri centered.
Was
Absolutely.
that a complicated question?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly Salieri centered, and he actually speaks about 90 minutes of the evening, of the afternoon. So that's is extremely weighted, toward that central protagonist. And I think interestingly, it's Mozart, what he says and what we hear, because there's a ton of music in the play, not as much as you would like sometimes, but if we had used as much, you'd still be over there watching and listening, and that might strain patience. But it depends on the work, certainly. I think almost all of Shakespeare's plays, by the way they were written and the theaters that they were written for, which this theater replicates, are by their very nature ensemble pieces. Ensemble to the extent that the kind of doubling or tripling that Shakespeare himself would have used is intrinsic to the ensemble playing. This play, written for a proscenium house and set in the proscenium world of a Baroque theater that we're often used to seeing, whether it's Broadway or remember there used to be a curtain that went up and down. Is operatic in size as well as in subject matter, epic for a central character who clearly makes the play entirely from his brain and mind from the beginning. It's set up accordingly. It's a very abstract start, as you saw. I mean, with people in masks and tricorns and capes and characters who wear exactly the same color and tone of costume at the beginning, which is to say that's not real. That's just an abstraction from what he is thinking in this fevered, more than mad brain. And those are the terms theatrically of the play at the outset that then gets carried out by this almost fixed focus on Salieri. He never leaves the stage in the play. We let David leave the stage briefly in Act 2 so he can get a quick glass of water. So. Thank you.
Just a quick comment. There's no question of why Mozart was, of course, bilingual, but I was impressed how the actor last night was able to move so quickly from French to English and was so.
Hold it very close to your mouth.
Is he also bilingual, the actor?
Well, Tasso, the question is about how the bilingual quality. Mozart speaks Italian better than the Italians. He speaks French, better than the brother of Marie Antoinette in this play. Another further, how is this possible, one human being? Tasso Feldman was raised in Greece. He has spent a lot of time in Europe, so he has an ear for all the rhythms of those different languages, which is what I think, really convinces us, although he is, of course, spot on with the language itself. Does that answer your question?
Yes, he did it so easily.
Yes.
Very impressed.
Yeah, it's one of the great jokes in the play, I think, is how astonishingly and maddeningly easy he does that. Yeah.
I was talking to a fellow theater goer here at Utah Shakespeare Festival that does go to the plays 3 times as we do, to see the development. And we both had the same thought. It was as if we were reading each other's mind. We saw that the Utah Shakes was going to do Amadeus. We saw Tony Amendola, and both of us said, "Oh my God, this is going to be like groundbreaking." F. Murray Abraham, Tony Amendola, who I consider very similar. This is going to be an unbelievable production. When I saw David was in it, I said, "What the David Ivers as Amadeus? He's what, 6'3" or something or other." And all the productions we saw, Amadeus or Salieri was a little bit smaller, but like everyone else here, David just blew us away as usual.
Gosh, I'm just contemplating Tony playing King Lear and Salieri in one season.
Well, that's what we said. He couldn't have done both, obviously.
Couldn't pay him enough.
He would have been dead in a week. So emotional.
But that brings up the question that often comes here with people who have seen the Shakespeare plays over and over, and they have a very set idea of what their Hamlet should look like, or what their Mark Antony should look like, and so then you all come back, fortunately, and you're willing to suspend for a moment, perhaps, and go into a play and say, well, what will you give me today? And that's the beauty of it. And in your case, you had an image of Salieri, and he wasn't as tall as David is. But in that opening scene, he's not tall. I mean, he's an old, hunched man. And then, well, people here who, how do I say this? You sense an ownership of the festival after you've been here for a while. And I notice quite often people in the Grove here will say, well, when we did Hamlet, or when we cast Amadeus, and it's you, the patrons, who have been coming for so long, and you have your ideas as to how we ought to do these things. But fortunately, we do hire professionals that know what they're doing. So, yes.
A couple of comments. To the lady if she's willing to come 400 miles, my husband Steve and I work with the new plays. We would love to take you to lunches and dinners if you'll come back. Nancy knows how to get hold of us.
You better, well, let me just explain what she's saying. In August, there is a program here called the New American Playwrights Project, and Diane and Steve Sharp are very integral in the success of that, of the running of that. And we bring 3 playwrights, American playwrights, to this campus for a week residency. Their plays are read in staged readings by and are directed by company members and feature actors in the company. And that is in the month of August. And Diane is inviting you to come back. Go ahead.
Thank you. But also to come and see Amadeus and the changes which take place. Thank you. I'll write you your check later. I wanted to ask a question about Salieri. Several times during the play, he comments, "Oh, the music. And I'm the only one who can hear it." Time and again, the emperor says, "There are too many notes. There are too many notes. There's something wrong here." I would like to have heard, perhaps, and I don't know if there is some of Salieri's music even available somewhere. If the lady out who plays the beautiful music at the Randall beforehand can play some of Salieri's pieces. She's brave enough to take that on. But was his music really not that appreciated?
Well, Mozart did things with dissonance and chromaticism that those ears weren't used to hearing. We are, because he changed music. But he did things. He was a revolutionary with that music. So a conservative, essentially conservative ear would be intrigued by some of it, fascinated by some of it, but there were just too many notes, because of the chromaticism and the dissonance primarily. This was his extraordinary contribution, but he was a prophet in his own land. He wasn't appreciated. Yeah, it was a paradigm shift, quite correctly. Salieri, if you pick up one of his CDs, you'll hear a very fine, 4-square, classical, Enlightenment piece of music. Not terrible, not extraordinary, not dissonant, not chromatic. They loved it then. It's what it is now. Joseph, the emperor, I mean, he likes music, I think. You always get the feeling he's off to his golf game or something, though. I mean, this is good. Now let's move on. He's an amateur enthusiast about music, and I think music in Vienna at the time certainly was a matter of state business, often too, as a music cultural center. But Mozart's paradigm shifting music just wasn't heard by everybody, except to Salieri's torment. He could hear it. He couldn't do it, but he could hear it.
There's a similar comparison to the work of Stephen Sondheim, there was a paradigm shift in musical theater when he started writing for the theater. And there are people to this day who say, why can't his music sound like Rodgers and Hammerstein? However, Rodgers and Hammerstein, there was a paradigm shift with them as well, because as you will see in South Pacific, and I've read a bit about Oscar Hammerstein's comments about his musicals, that every character, when they sing, needs to tell a story. That the lyric you need, after you have heard a Hammerstein lyric, you ought to know more about the character. And so that was new. Shakespeare, same thing. He brought emotion to characters that had not been seen before on the stage. So along comes Mozart at the same time as Salieri, and poor old Joseph wasn't quite ready to hear that. I mean, we have people here in my 12 years here that say the play was too long. And if we had done it the way Shakespeare had written it, they would be 4 hours or 5 hours. So it's, it happens. And it just, this is really far afield, but I have to say it because it came to my mind. I'm a Utah Jazz fan, and we came up against a player named Michael Jordan. And after that, I mean, we had terrific players, but it just so happened at that time, Michael Jordan was at his best, and we didn't make it to a championship ring. And we could talk about baseball, but we should shift back to White Sox fan here, huge White Sox fan.
Oh, misery, misery.
Yes.
Especially the White Sox.
Misery, misery. And with the Cubs being good this year. Oh, misery, misery.
Yes.
Salieri and Mozart, right?
We experienced an interesting dynamic yesterday. I brought my grandchildren for the second year in a row, and of course they're loving the festival. And afterward, we went to eat dinner, and we sat next to a couple who had also come from the play, and we as usual started talking about the play and what the interesting things. And the dynamic, we all love David Ivers, and for him to play a part that's so despicable. I mean, he bordered on evil. I mean, he really did. Maybe not to Richard III evil, but pretty close. But then he gets his comeuppance, but there's all these feelings, that are floating with us, and the discussions that came from that were just fantastic. All of the feelings that we talked about. And especially our love for David, but then what a despicable character he portrayed.
Not born that way, born pious, born rectitude.
No, it developed.
Yeah,
you could see.
What it is he takes you through the rooms of that, and how that. I mean, Richard III starts that way, and tells you that. But in this case, we're taken through that process, and I think the play really wants to say. I mean, at one point he says, "What would you do? If you were allowed to, as part of this wicked process, we're allowed to see a human rival, diminish. Which of you would pass up that opportunity if it was given to you?" And that's a dramatic question. I think we are simply asked that as we see his life, but we are taken into his mind, into his heart, into his broken heart, into his questioning soul. He keeps saying over and over, answer me, answer me, answer me, tell me. There's no reward for his goodness. Was Mozart good, he says? Richard Wagner was a deeply horrible man. It does not affect the virtue of his music. So this is a dilemma we have in the human experience, and the play wants to ask that question. But I think the genius of it, for as far as the Salieri character goes, for us, is that he just sort of takes us through that process where he ends up, and then at the very end, he's asking for forgiveness.
Especially pitting him against an almost innocence, as he says, "Who's going to show me the evil now?"
Yeah, that's right.
But there was an innocence there, and to take advantage of that, I mean, it was.
What I also think is extraordinary in this play too is that he adores the music and despises the music's creator, and he has to sort that dilemma out.
Well, I'm so glad you're here directing this. I mean,
So
your Lear, I I saw it 3 times and I loved it. I'm anxious to see this Lear. But Jim, we're really glad you're back.
So am I. Thank you, J.R. Sullivan, very much for
Thank you.
being here and for your production. We will be back tomorrow with the director of Henry IV Part 2, Brian Vaughn, and at the 10 o'clock hour, the director of Charlie's Aunt, David Ivers. I hope you can join us tomorrow. Thank you for being here.